You remember that book called Gulliver's Travels? Gulliver was an Englishman who was traveling, and he got to this land of all these little people called the Lilliputians. And he was lying on the beach, and the next thing you know, they put all these cords on him, and he couldn't get up because these Lilliputians were all over him. Mm-hmm. Well, we've got our share of Lilliputians, and they're strangling the economy, and they're stealing our freedoms. What is that? Federal regulations that threaten the very lifeblood of America. And I tell you, the Gulliver has got to stand up strong and shake off those Washington-based Lilliputians.
Well, the number of these new rules has exploded under President Obama, and as Paul Strand reports, some leaders in Washington are sounding the alarm.
Regulatory agencies continue to strangle American businesses and U.S. citizens with some 3,000 new regulations every year. But critics say that under the Obama administration, the pace of the really expensive regulations is especially mushrooming. Those monster regs cost at least $100 million each for businesses to comply with.
The regulatory state had grown so massive under previous presidents, it was already a drag on the American economy. But now under President Obama, the cost has grown by more than double.
James Cattuso has written about this leap of major regulations and their expense in the Heritage Foundation's new report, Red Tape Rising.
For the past 6 years, there's $80 billion in new regulatory costs. That's $80 billion Americans pay every single year just from the new regulations.
The Bush administration added just half that much in its first 6 years. And Senator Ron Johnson says when you combine all the cost of complying with America's more than 300,000 regulations built up over the decades, it totals $2 trillion or more every year.
Only 10 economies in the world are larger than $2 trillion. That's what we are burdening job creators with in this nation, a compliance cost that is bigger than all but 9 or 10 economies in the world.
Senator James Lankford points out because these are regulations from federal agencies and not laws passed by Congress, a president could just wipe them out with the stroke of a pen.
A new president actually could unilaterally walk in and say, I want us to look at those rules again. I want to take away some of these executive actions. Laws last a long time. Regulations can be shifted with the new executive. So it is important we ask any presidential candidate, what are you going to do with regulations?
Both senators at this discussion on Red Tape Rising argued that Americans should make this a major issue in the 2016 election.
We need to understand the burden. We got to demand our freedom back.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Well, you see, it's like a fungus. It grows. And every bureaucrat thinks what he or she is doing is important. He or she is regulating some little function of the government, and they think it's important. And it's so important that they need more people to help them do it. And then the people who get involved think that what they're doing is important, and they need some more people. And then they need to put out regulations. They're sitting in an office, and they get paid a salary. And what do they do with that office and that salary? They've got to justify themselves. So why not get to a computer and write out a new regulation? We'll keep those nasty businesses from imposing their will on the public. We will protect the middle class, and on and on and on. That's how it grows. And it's never ending. $2 trillion a year this fungus is costing us. Well, my dear friend Jay Sekulow, the executive counsel of the national, you know, I'll say it right in a minute, general counsel of the American Center for Law and Justice. He's written a book about unelected bureaucrats can steal your freedoms. It's called Undemocratic. Jay, it's a great topic. How come you wrote this book?
Well, I'll tell you why, Pat. It's exactly because what we have been doing, you and I together at the American Center for Law and Justice for going on almost 3 decades now, has been dealing with government red tape, government bureaucracy. Look, we've experienced it. We've litigated. We've seen it up close. We've seen it personally. Unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats are really running the government. So we've created this kind of fourth branch of government that is basically taking over. And they're more powerful than the legislative branch, more powerful than the Supreme Court, frankly, more powerful than the presidency. And it's exactly as you said at the beginning of the broadcast. It's one person, then becomes 2 people, then it becomes a department, then an agency. And these agencies are what are controlling the lives of the American people, and they're out of control. So what we did in the book was two things. One, we document through a number of the governmental agencies, IRS, EPA, Department of Justice, NLRB, Health and Human Services, the list goes on and on. We document the problems, and then we put forward the solutions, because this is something you trained us on so many years ago. You can't just say, here's the problem, good luck. You've got to offer a solution, and the solution is resist, and sometimes, as you know, that takes court action. Sometimes it's a legislative fix. Reform. You know, these agencies and these individual agents could violate civil rights of citizens and be not held accountable. If you look at the VA scandal, look at the IRS scandal, no one fired. No one terminated. No one demoted. A couple people eventually quit. You know, that's the most you can say.
Congress is supposed to do these regulations, but it's so easy for a congressman to duck behind the EPA. Well, I don't like what they're doing, the congressman tells his voters, but it's the EPA that did it. Well, a lot of them are ducking behind these agencies, aren't they?
They are, and we can't allow the excuse any longer. So not only do you resist when the regulations are wrong, whether it's court action, whether it's changes in the law, you have to reform these agencies. Some of these agencies can be reformed. Some of them, frankly, Pat, have to be. I think the IRS, for instance, is beyond redemption at this point. I don't think they're capable of self-correcting. We now know there was just a Court of Appeals case involving our IRS case where the D.C. panel was very tough, very, very tough on the government. That's just one example. We know the IRS has colluded with the FEC. We know they've colluded with the Department of Justice. I can name every government agency. And then we've got to restore a balance to a constitutional republic. And the reason that I wrote the book and the reason we call it undemocratic is we live in a constitutional republic. That's a form of democracy, but it's a specific form of democracy. It's a constitutional republic. And what's happening right now is undemocratic. It's not what's happening in the White House or at the Supreme Court of the United States or the Capitol. And we've got offices, as you know, right across the street and right down the street from all of those. It's what's happening 4 blocks away, a mile down the road, down in Foggy Bottom. That's what's controlling Washington, D.C. And, Pat, this is something you've been talking about for decades, and we've now put the evidence out there with a solution.
The thing that I'm really concerned about is how many people are being incarcerated. And these rules, actually, these agencies are now adding criminal sanctions to their rules, which is a shocking new development, but it's loading the prisons.
It is, Pat, and this is creating not only a burdening problem on the federal government budget, but incarcerating people that didn't even have a clue that what they were alleged to have done constituted some type of crime. You even have, and we documented this in the book, these settle and sue cases where DOJ forces, people that the DOJ have a relationship with organizations, especially in the environmental, the EPA area, a plaintiff will file a lawsuit. It will be settled the very same day the lawsuit's filed, and as part of the consent decree that the government enters into, they include all these new sanctions, which could include criminal sanctions, civil sanctions, forfeiture. All of those are agreed to by the government, an interpretation of a law to say this is now a crime. And that's all done the same day the fake lawsuit is filed. These are put-up lawsuits. They're not real. They're real in the sense that they're going to court. But this is collusion, and it's got to stop, and it's got to stop now.
Well, this book, Undemocratic, ladies and gentlemen, is something you need to read, and it'll shock you. When did it come out, Jay? Is it in the bookstores now?
Yesterday. So this is one of our first interviews on it. The book just came out yesterday. It's doing great. And, Pat, it really does document things that you've been talking about and you've been training us on for well over almost 30 years now. And we've just put it all together and said, you know, we need a cohesive, lay out the evidence, lay out the solution, and that's what we've done in Undemocratic.
Well, you're a great voice for freedom, and I appreciate you. Undemocratic, ladies and gentlemen, it's there. It's in New York. He's a best-selling author, Jay Sekulow, and you need to read this. I mean, how are these guys getting away with it? But I mean, what an awful drag on the economy. $2 trillion these people cost with their stupid regulations. Read this book.
Americans in the heartland are cleaning up today after the touchdown of dozens of tornadoes, 20 of them in Texas alone. And as Ephraim Graham reports, folks in other areas are dealing with the worst flooding they've ever seen.
This is all that remains of a church in Mineral Wells, Texas, just west of Dallas, where 2 powerful tornadoes touched down.
I seen the funnel cloud start to drop. I I seen a small tail come down. As soon as it, I guess, touched, debris flew up in the air, a bunch of big black shingles and such. Seen the transformer flow, and it looked like it picked up and then headed a little bit east.
Next thing I know, I see it start peeling off the roof, and the boards are just flying through the air. And that's when we knew we had to get inside.
The twisters caused extensive damage, but no injuries.
We're very thankful that this didn't occur earlier in the evening, because it would have been rush hour and there could have been 400 or 500 cars here just getting off of work.
Aside from the tornadoes, it is the flooding that's causing problems in other parts of the nation's midsection. In 24 hours, San Angelo, Texas got the most rain it's seen in 35 years. More than 20 drivers trapped in sinking cars. Massive flooding in Shreveport, Louisiana as well, paralyzing many parts of the city.
I have never seen this much rain. I've been in Shreveport for 32 years.
Much of Denver, Colorado is also underwater. Rushing water, even Whitecaps where there should be a park. And in the Rockies, a snowstorm just a month away from summer. Forecasters are telling residents to brace for more threatening weather throughout the remainder of the week. Ephraim Graham, CBN News.
In other news, North Korea says it now has the technology to build nuclear warheads small enough to fit on missiles. That would give the communist regime a nuclear threat against other countries in the region, and possibly even the United States if the North could put a nuclear warhead on an intercontinental missile. Military experts have offered mixed assessments about the North's nuclear capabilities, but few doubt the regime has been working hard to develop nuclear weapons technology. Pat?
We may have to deal with that situation. That's like a criminal enterprise. The people are in desperate poverty, and they have a terribly small gross domestic product, and yet they're using a major portion of it to build weapons and to keep the family of Kim Jong-il in power. But what do they have? A conventional warhead has one explosive device in it. They use what's called the MIRV tech reach, which is multiple entry kind of thing. And now you can put 3 of them. So you've got a missile going out with a cone, and you've got 3 of these little things inside of it. And each one can have its own intelligence to tell it where to go. So you can have 3 different targets. So you launch one missile, and then at some predetermined point in its flight, the cone comes off, and these 3 little fellas are, as I say, little fellas, each one the same nuclear power as what did Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So we're looking at major breakthrough. Plus, they claim they can do it from underwater, and that's been our ace in the hole. We've had that Triton missile program for so long, and these people, I mean, these submarines are pretty much hidden. Nobody knows exactly where they are, and so they can travel around hidden in the ocean and then launch underwater one of these MIRV missiles. They're very dangerous. We have them, and to think that North Korea has them, sooner or later, we may have to say, well, we've had enough of this bunch. They're a danger to the security of the entire world, and we have to make a preemptive strike. But in the process, keep in mind that they threaten Seoul, which is right on the border of North Korea and the Korean Peninsula, and they are targeting Seoul with all kinds of artillery, weapons, and possibly nuclear devices. So we would have to interdict all of that stuff and shut it down before we could hit North Korea. So it's a difficult problem. But our diplomats have spent all this time temporizing and giving grain to them and giving advice. And if you just cut down your program, we will give you this and all that. And the North Koreans just laugh at us. It's terrible. This is a major problem. You've got North Korea, and then you've got Iran. You've got these rogue states having this gigantic technological breakthrough that can threaten Europe, threaten America, threaten the free world. Not a pleasant scenario.
With ISIS looming so large, it's hard to focus on North Korea and Russia. I mean, we've got our hands full with ISIS right now.
Well, Russia's been more responsible because, after all, they did know that we had the power to destroy them. And so we had what's called mutual assured destruction, MAD. And they used the term détente, but it was kind of in a tension where they didn't attack us, we didn't attack them, and we kind of got along together. These crazies don't care.
They really don't.
They don't care.
And the sad thing is their people, the citizens, are good people. It's the governments that are nuts, like you said.
Well, what's been done to those people, they're smaller in stature, they're lighter in weight, they have been deprived of food, they have been deprived of freedom. It is the most hideous monster. Kim Il-sung was a lieutenant colonel put in by Russia as their man in Korea. When the Korean War went on, we could have gone and followed General MacArthur, invaded that north up to the Yellow River and shut them down, but we didn't do it. Truman held back, said, no, we can't run the risk of a war. So we left him in power. And this one lieutenant colonel put in by Moscow has set up this family. It's a criminal family, criminal enterprise, and he owns the whole country. And now his son came in and he ran his thing, and now this funny-looking boy, he is the grandson of Kim Il-sung. All right.
John's next. John's got more.
All right,
Take it away, John.
Well, authorities in Canada have arrested 10 young people suspected of trying to travel to Iraq and Syria to join ISIS. The arrests were made over the weekend at Montreal's Trudeau International Airport. No charges have been filed yet, but the investigation is ongoing. Investigators have questioned families and friends of the young people. All 10 of them had their passports confiscated. Anne Graham Lotz is sounding an alarm. The Reverend Billy Graham's daughter believes God is sending clear signs that his judgment is coming on America and the world. So she's launched Mayday, a distress call for prayer. She's asking Christians around the world to pray 1 hour a day for the church and America, focusing on praise and worship, confession and repentance, and spiritual warfare and intercession. The initiative goes through this Sunday. Lotz told CBN News why she believes prayer is so necessary.
I don't think the answer is in Washington. I don't think it's in our economy. I don't think it's in our military. Only God can solve the problems we face today. And the world is not going to turn to God. It's up to God's people to stand in the gap. If God's people who are called by God's name will pray and humble themselves and seek his face and turn from our wicked ways, then he'll hear our prayer, he'll forgive our sin, and God will bless America. But so I think the blessing on America is directly related to God's people getting their act together. So this Mayday distress call for prayer has that as its purpose, just crying out to God, you know, for ourselves, for our church, and for our nation, that he would spare us the judgment that I believe is coming.
You can see the rest of the interview with Anne Graham Lotz and find out more about her Mayday call to prayer at cbnnews.com.